The first thing I saw was the error of my ways, spelled out in a terrifyingly calm, green-on-black font. Command sent, all units. My blood ran colder than the half-full mug of coffee sitting next to my keyboard. On the central monitor, the one displaying a live schematic of the city's entire transit grid, my world was ending. Dozens of little icons, each representing a multi-ton vehicle full of unsuspecting passengers or overflowing with other people's garbage, had just executed a synchronized and wholly unauthorized change of course. They were all heading for me. Dad? I glanced down. My son, Max, peered up at me, his 8-year-old face a mask of concern. He held his velociraptor toy in one hand and a half-eaten fruit snack in the other. Are the garbage trucks supposed to race the city buses? No, buddy, I managed, my voice a strangled squeak. No, they are not. From the corner of the room, a new sound emerged, the low groan of a man witnessing something that his brain was fundamentally unprepared to process. It was Dave, my contractor. He stood frozen, a tape measure dangling limply from his hand, his eyes wide with a particular kind of horror usually reserved for discovering a load-bearing wall is actually made of cheese. Is this part of the job? Dave asked, his voice barely a whisper. Like a zoning thing? Because I gotta be honest, Leo, I didn't price in a municipal vehicle flash mob. My fingers flew across the keyboard, a frantic, desperate dance of Ctrl+C and pseudo-kill -9. Don't panic, I said, mostly to myself. Okay, panic a little. You've defused digital time bombs for shadowy 3-letter agencies. You've navigated dark web marketplaces that would make a demon blush. This is just civic planning. Aggressive, unsolicited civic planning. On the map, a convoy of 3 street sweepers had broken formation from their downtown route and were now lumbering, like a trio of bristly mechanical elephants, towards the pristine, HOA-mandated serenity of Harmony Meadows, my home. How did I get here? How did I, Leo Maxwell, a man whose greatest ambition for the last 2 years has been perfecting his sourdough starter and remembering which day is recycling, end up with the entire city fleet descending on his cul-de-sac? It started, as most suburban apocalypses do, with a stopwatch and a woman named Karen. Life in Harmony Meadows is a masterclass in performative tranquility. We have perfectly manicured lawns, mailboxes painted in one of 3 approved shades of taupe-tation, and a homeowners association that governs our lives with the kind of zealous oversight usually reserved for nuclear launch codes. Before moving here, I was a ghost, a digital wraith. I worked in cybersecurity for a firm whose name you've never heard of, doing things I can't talk about for clients I was never supposed to meet. I lived in the ethereal world of data streams and encrypted back channels. Now, my most complex daily negotiation is convincing an 8-year-old that, no, chocolate syrup is not a recognized food group. It's a different kind of high-stakes game. The undisputed queen of this beige kingdom is Karen. HOA President Karen. A woman who doesn't just walk, she patrols. She carries a clipboard like a royal scepter and possesses an almost supernatural ability to spot a blade of grass that has grown a 1/4 inch beyond regulation height. Her reign has been marked by a series of increasingly despotic decrees, the outlawing of basketball hoops that were not aesthetically harmonious, a mandatory seasonal lawn decoration rotation, gourds by October 1st, or face a fine, and the infamous Serenity Hour from 4 p.m. to 5 p.m., a quiet period that directly coincided with every child's primal post-school need to scream and run in circles. Our conflict, however, wasn't over lawn gnomes or wind chimes. It was about the bus. Specifically, Bus 7, the chariot that was supposed to carry my son, Max, to his scholastic destiny each morning. The whole thing kicked off on a Tuesday. It was Dino Day at Westbrook Elementary, an event of earth-shattering importance in Max's world. He had chosen his champion, a velociraptor with articulated claws, and was vibrating with the need to show it to his friends. The bus was scheduled for 7:45 a.m. By 7:40 a.m., Karen was already at her post near the community-funded solar-powered bus stop sign. She was in the middle of writing a citation for the Hendersons. Their crime? Parking their minivan a scandalous 3 inches too far from the curb, its shadow falling in an unapproved manner upon the sidewalk. "Morning, Karen," I said, steering Max towards the small group of kids. She gave me a tight, reptilian smile. "Leo, I trust Max is prepared for a punctual departure." "He's always prepared. It's the bus that occasionally marches to the beat of its own drummer," I replied, a little too cheerfully. A vein in her temple did a little tap dance. "Punctuality is the cornerstone of a functional society, Leo. Without it, there is only chaos." I gave Max a look. He knew the look. It meant, Dad is about to be sarcastic, do not engage. At 7:48 a.m., the bus was officially 3 minutes late. Karen's posture stiffened. She began muttering under her breath, a low incantation of unacceptable deviations and flagrant disregard for the schedule. When the big yellow vehicle finally lumbered into view, she didn't just stand there. She strode towards it, clipboard held high like a charging knight's lance. The doors hissed open, and she immediately engaged the poor bus driver, a middle-aged guy who looked like he'd rather be wrestling an alligator. "Driver, it is 7:49 and 12 seconds, she announced. "Your scheduled arrival time is 7:45. This 4-minute and 12-second discrepancy has been noted." She gestured dramatically at the new digital clock she'd had the HOA install, a gleaming monument to her obsession. The driver just blinked at her. "Got stuck behind a garbage truck, lady. You want me to run it over?" Karen recoiled, as if he'd suggested sacrificing a puppy on the HOA's altar of perfectly pruned petunias. "I want you to adhere to the schedule. That is all." The next day, the bus was on time. Karen stood at the stop with the smug satisfaction of a Roman general surveying a conquered province. But on Thursday, a substitute driver, unfamiliar with the route's nuances, was a full 5 minutes late. This was, in Karen's world, tantamount to an act of war. I saw her pacing on her lawn later that day, speaking into her phone with the frantic urgency of a CIA operative reporting a coup. I made a joke to my wife that she was probably trying to get the Department of Transportation to designate our bus stop a punctuality critical zone. I had no idea how close to the truth I was. Friday morning arrived, crisp and full of promise. Max was ready, velociraptor in tow, prepared to regale his classmates with tales of its Cretaceous period prowess. We walked to the bus stop, joining the small cluster of kids and parents. 7:45 a.m. came and went, then 7:50 a.m. The usual cheerful chatter among the parents began to curdle into low murmurs of concern. By 8 a.m., the murmurs had become a low-grade panic. Little Timmy Henderson was on the verge of tears, convinced the bus had forgotten them forever. I did what any modern, tech-reliant parent would do. I pulled out my phone and opened the school district's Track a Bus app. Service unavailable. That was odd. I tried the website on my phone's browser. Same message. It wasn't just down. It was like the entire system had been wiped from existence. "My app's not working," said another mom, frantically refreshing her screen. "Is yours?" A chorus of no's rippled through the group. Frantic calls were being made to the school, which were, of course, going straight to a very busy voicemail. The scene was descending into suburban chaos. But then I noticed Karen. She was standing slightly apart from our frantic huddle, tending to her prize-winning azaleas. She wasn't panicking. She wasn't even concerned. In fact, she had a small, serene, almost triumphant smile on her face. It was the smile of someone who knows a secret. My internal alarms, the ones honed by years of sniffing out digital footprints and spotting anomalies in oceans of code, started blaring. This wasn't a random server outage. This was deliberate. I excused myself from the parental panic party and walked over to her. "Karen," I said, keeping my tone as level as I could. "You seem remarkably composed in the face of this logistical nightmare. Any theories?" She looked up from her flowers, dabbing a bit of imaginary dust from a petal. "Oh, hello, Leo. It is a shame, isn't it? I suppose it just goes to show how fragile all this modern technology is. When systems fail, it truly reveals the importance of reliable, old-fashioned punctuality, don't you think?" It was a masterful non-denial denial. But then she overplayed her hand. "You know," she continued with a conspiratorial lean, "I was just reading a fascinating article online. It said it's surprisingly easy for these GPS signals to be interfered with. By any number of common household electronics, apparently." The way she said "interfered with that little verbal italicization, sent a jolt through me. It was the "I'm telling you what I did without actually telling you what I did" tone, beloved by villains and passive-aggressive relatives everywhere. My eyes drifted from her smug face up to the roof of her perfectly maintained two-story colonial. And there it was. A brand-new, comically oversized satellite dish, aimed not at the sky, but more horizontally, towards the main road where the bus would make its approach. It looked less like a device for receiving television, and more like something designed to give a mild headache to low-flying aircraft. It hadn't been there last week. Localized signal interference, GPS jammer. That was it. The psycho had actually done it. She'd jammed the bus's GPS to teach the district a lesson. "Is that lady a supervillain, Dad?" Max whispered, having followed me over. "Something like that, kiddo," I whispered back, a slow, dangerous anger beginning to build in my chest. Her superpower is weaponized pettiness. I turned back to the other parents. "New plan," I announced, with a confidence I didn't entirely feel. "Everyone, get your kids to school however you can. I'm going to make a few calls. Figure this out." I herded a confused Max back towards our house. My mind was racing. I could call the cops, but what would I say? My neighbor's satellite dish is giving off bad vibes? I needed proof. I could try to hack the school district's contracted bus company. But that was a legal line even I was hesitant to cross. Too messy. Too many potential consequences for me. But the city, the entire city transit authority, that was a different animal. A public utility. A sprawling, ancient, interconnected mess of systems built on top of systems. I knew from my old life that municipal networks were often a patchwork of security holes held together with digital duct tape and prayer. Karen wanted to play games with signals and schedules. Fine. I was about to change the game entirely. She thought she was causing a minor disruption to prove a point. She had no idea she had just picked a fight with a guy who could turn her little disruption into a city-wide symphony of chaos. My home office is my sanctuary. Or, more accurately, my high-tech man cave. It's a glorious mess of 3 monitors, a custom-built PC tower that hums with latent power, and enough cables snaking across the floor to trip an entire SWAT team. The air smells faintly of old coffee, ozone, and desperation. This was my war room. I sat Max down in my comfy chair, positioning him as my official co-pilot. His critical mission: to ensure our strategic reserve of fruit snacks did not fall into enemy hands, and to provide color commentary. "Okay, Max," I said, cracking my knuckles. "Daddy's going to do a little work. It's like finding a lost puppy. But the puppy is a 40-foot-long metal box, and we're going to find it using the internet." "Are you a spy, Daddy?" he asked, his eyes wide. "I'm retired," I said. "Mostly." I began my work. The plan was simple in concept, audacious in execution. I wasn't going to launch a brute force attack. That's for amateurs. I was going to be elegant, a digital cat burglar. My entry point was the city's public Wi-Fi network, the one you can connect to at parks and libraries. It was a notoriously insecure system, a digital welcome mat for any hacker with half a brain. And I knew, from a long-forgotten municipal contract proposal I'd once reviewed, that the public Wi-Fi servers were physically on the same internal network as the Austin Transit Authority. It was a rookie mistake, a glaring vulnerability left open for years. They might as well have left the front door open with a sign that said, "Please don't steal our buses." I was deep into tracing a network packet's journey, looking for that open port, when the doorbell rang. "Ding dong!" "I'll get it!" Max yelled, already scrambling off the chair. "No, wait, Max!" Too late. A moment later, a large, deeply confused man was standing at the threshold of my office. It was Dave, my contractor. The man I had hired 3 weeks ago to build a new deck, a man who had finally shown up, tool belt slung low on his hips, ready to work. He stared at the scene before him. Me, hunched over my glowing monitors like a mad scientist, my son saluting him with a half-eaten velociraptor. Leo?" Dave said slowly, his eyes darting between my frantic typing and the complex network diagrams on the screen. "Good morning. Got the lumber in the truck. Cedar, like you wanted. Is now a bad time to talk about joist spacing?" My mind, juggling IP addresses and subnet masks, momentarily short-circuited. An idea, born of pure desperation and caffeine, sparked to life. "Dave," I said, turning to him with an intensity that made him take a step back. "You're a man who understands structure, foundations. I need you." "For the deck?" he asked hopefully. "For justice," I replied, my voice low and serious. "Look, things are a little sensitive right now. I need a lookout. And coffee, a lot more coffee. This is a matter of local security. National security. The lines are getting a little blurry, to be honest." Dave stared at me. He looked at Max, who was now making his velociraptor chew on a network cable. He looked at my screens, filled with scrolling green text. He looked like a man whose simple, understandable world of wood and nails had just collided with a speeding train of crazy. Does this affect my pay?" he asked. "Your pay is secure, Dave. Your innocence? Less so. Now, is that a fresh pot of coffee I smell?" Utterly bewildered, but apparently willing to do anything for a paying gig, Dave just nodded and backed out of the room, muttering something about pressure-treated pine. With my perimeter notionally secured by a bewildered carpenter, I refocused. And then I found it. Port 22, open, unsecured. A gaping digital maw leading right into the heart of the city's network. I slid through it so fast I barely left a ripple. And there it was, the Austin Transit Command interface. It was a relic, a beautiful monstrosity of 1990s programming. No sleek graphics, no user-friendly buttons, just a black screen and glowing green text. A command line interface that probably predated my son's existence. To me, it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. Access granted. I could see everything. Bus 42 on its way down Congress Avenue. Sanitation truck 11 heading towards the landfill. A street sweeper named Sweepy. They'd actually named the street sweepers. Methodically cleaning 6th Street. I was in. But the school buses weren't there. As I suspected, they were run by a private company and not part of the official city fleet. But their GPS transponders had to be pinging something. They had to be sending out a signal, a tiny digital cry for help into the void. All I had to do was listen. I started writing a quick script, my fingers flying. A simple little program to scan all incoming transponder pings, cross-reference them with the official city manifest, and display anything that didn't match. I was looking for ghosts. My ghost buses. "What are you doing now, Dad?" Max asked, tugging on my sleeve. "I'm building a net, kiddo. A big, invisible net to catch all the lost buses." From the doorway, Dave reappeared, holding a fresh mug of coffee like a peace offering. "I called the lumber yard," he said. "Told them we might have a slight delay due to unforeseen civic engagement." I took the mug from him, my eyes never leaving the screen. "You're a good man, Dave." He just shook his head slowly, watching the code scroll by. "I'm just here for the deck, Leo. I'm just here for the deck." The script compiled without a single error. I took a deep breath, a gulp of Dave's surprisingly excellent coffee, and hit enter. For a second, nothing happened. Then, a single green dot blinked into existence on my map. Far to the west, then another to the north. One by one, my ghost buses started to appear, my digital net catching their faint, frantic signals. They were scattered across the city like confused metal sheep. And there, stranded in a new subdivision 3 neighborhoods over, was Bus 7, Max's bus. A grin spread across my face. I had found them. But finding them wasn't enough. I had to guide them home. I dug deeper into the transit command system, and what I found made my heart sing with nerdy glee. The system was so ancient, so utterly devoid of modern security protocols that I could do more than just see the city fleet. I could communicate with them. I could send text messages directly to the small dispatch screens on their dashboards. My fingers trembled with excitement as I selected the unit closest to Bus 7's location, a city bus designated as Route 12. I typed, "This is Transit Command. Urgent. School bus stranded near your location. Please relay new directions." But then I saw another function. A command labeled reroute_unit. It was meant for dispatchers to manually override a vehicle's GPS. It was a tool of immense power, and it was completely unprotected. I targeted the transponder signal for Bus 7. I couldn't send it a message, but I could manipulate the signals around it. I could create a new, false path for its GPS to follow. With a few keystrokes, I laid out a new route, a digital breadcrumb trail that would lead it out of the subdivision and back towards Harmony Meadows. On my map, I watched as the icon for Bus 7, which had been stationary for 20 minutes, slowly began to move. It was following my path. It was working. A laugh, a pure, unadulterated cackle of triumph escaped my lips. "It's working!" I yelled, jumping to my feet. "I am the bus god!" Dave, who had been nervously sanding a piece of 2x4 in the hallway, peeked in. "The what now?" "The bus god, Dave. I control the movement of all vehicular things. I am the master of logistics, the king of the commute." I was giddy, drunk on a cocktail of caffeine, adrenaline, and unchecked administrative privileges. I started helping the other lost school buses, rerouting them with the benevolent omnipotence of a deity sorting out a traffic jam on Mount Olympus. I was so caught up in my newfound power, so engrossed in juggling a dozen different routes, that I got sloppy. I saw another lost bus far to the south, and intended to send a message to all the city vehicles in its immediate vicinity to be on the lookout. I typed a new, powerful command. "All drivers in your vicinity, proceed to Harmony Meadows for immediate student pickup." My plan was to then specify the bus number. But my finger slipped. My focus was split. In my godlike state, I failed to notice that the active selection window wasn't a small group of buses. It was the master window. The one labeled, in what should have been a terrifyingly obvious warning, all_units. I hit enter. The map on my screen erupted. It was like watching a hornet's nest that had just been kicked. Every single icon, every bus, every garbage truck, every single street sweeper jerked to a halt and then began to move with a new, unified purpose. They were all heading for the same destination, my cul-de-sac. The color drained from my face. The bus god was now the god of unintended consequences. "Dad," Max said, his voice small, "Sweepy is coming to our house, and he's bringing all his friends." I watched in abject horror as the map showed the city's entire sanitation fleet abandoning their routes and making a beeline for the suburbs. A convoy of street sweepers was converging on my neighborhood like a slow-motion biker gang. I had just inadvertently summoned every municipal vehicle in Austin to my front door. My frantic attempts to issue a cancel command were interrupted by a new, horrifying sight. Not on my screen, but through my office window. Flashing red and blue lights. A police car was pulling into my driveway. Knock, knock, knock. The knocks on the front door sounded like hammer blows of doom. "I'll get it," Max chirped, ever helpful. "No," I yelped, diving out of my chair. "Nobody get the door!" I scrambled to the front hall, heart pounding. Dave was standing there, pale as a ghost, holding a power drill like a weapon. "Leo," he whispered, "there are cops here, and a garbage truck is trying to do a three-point turn in your neighbor's prize-winning rose garden. This feels like it's beyond the scope of a standard decking contract." I peered through the peephole. Standing on my porch was Officer Miller, a man with a salt-and-pepper mustache and an expression that suggested he'd seen it all and was profoundly tired by it. I took a deep breath, plastered on my most innocent "who me" face, and opened the door. "Officer," I said with forced calm, "to what do we owe the pleasure?" Officer Miller looked past me, into my house. He looked at Dave, who was now attempting to look casual by intensely examining a light switch. He looked at Max, who beamed at him and said, "My daddy is the bus god. He's helping the lost buses." I shot Max a look. This was not the time for brutal honesty. "Heh, kids," I chuckled nervously. "He's got a great imagination. We were just, playing a new video game. City Planner Extreme." Miller's gaze was flat and unimpressed. "We got a call, Mr. Maxwell, from a concerned citizen. Reported some suspicious internet activity. And a man yelling about being a god." "Karen," I breathed, "of course." "The call also mentioned," Miller continued, his eyes narrowing, "a disturbance. Is there any reason why 3 city street sweepers and a sanitation truck are currently gridlocked in your cul-de-sac?" I summoned every ounce of my old poker face, the one I used when government agents asked me questions I couldn't answer. "That is strange, officer. Must be a dispatch error. You know how it is with these city systems, probably running on Windows 95. Officer Miller gave me a long, hard stare. A stare that said, "I don't know what you're doing, but I know you're doing something, and I'm 5 seconds away from caring a lot more than I do right now." He was a man on the edge, but without probable cause, his hands were tied. He couldn't enter my house just because my son called me a deity, and the sanitation department had decided to have a block party on my street. "All right, Mr. Maxwell," he said finally, his voice heavy with suspicion. "Keep the gaming to a minimum. I've got a traffic situation to deal with." He turned and walked back to his car, leaving me standing in my doorway, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had dodged a bullet, but the war was far from over. The real battle was just about to begin. With Officer Miller momentarily placated and now occupied with the Sisyphean task of directing a garbage truck out of a flower bed, I raced back to my command center. The first order of business was damage control. With a few frantic commands, I managed to issue a universal cancel_, and_reset order. On my map, the swarm of municipal vehicles faltered, then slowly, reluctantly, began turning back towards their abandoned routes. The immediate crisis was averted, but the evidence of my meddling was currently crushing my neighbor's prize-winning petunias. My next move had to be precise. I isolated the signal for Bus 7. It was time to bring my boy home. No more godlike pronouncements. This was a surgical strike. I crafted a clean, direct route, a digital express lane that led from its stranded position straight to the end of my cul-de-sac. Minutes later, the glorious yellow behemoth rumbled into view. The doors hissed open, and a very relieved-looking Max descended the steps, clutching his velociraptor. He ran to me, and I scooped him up in a hug, a wave of pure, unadulterated relief washing over me. For a moment, all the chaos melted away. It was just a dad, happy to see his son was safe. The moment of peace lasted for approximately 9 seconds. A city-issue sedan, a boring gray Ford, screeched to a halt behind the school bus. The driver's door flew open, and a woman stormed out. She had a headset askew on her head, a stain on her blouse that was probably coffee, but could have been despair, and a wild, hunted look in her eyes. "You!" she yelled, pointing a trembling finger at me. "Who in the Sam Hill are you, and what did you just do to my system? I have spent the last hour fielding calls from every driver in the fleet. I have garbage men reporting sightings of school buses in industrial parks. I have a street sweeper who thinks he was ordered to clean a toll booth on the interstate. My entire grid looks like a plate of spaghetti thrown at a wall." This, I surmised, was Brenda from Transit Command. She looked even more stressed out than her digital interface. Before I could formulate a response that would ideally not involve admitting to multiple felonies, a third party entered the fray. Marching down the sidewalk, clipboard in hand, was Karen. Her face was a mask of righteous fury and triumphant vindication. She had seen the police car, she had seen the traffic jam, and she had come to deliver the finishing blow. "Leo Maxwell!" she boomed, her voice echoing across the now eerily quiet cul-de-sac. "Look at this chaos. This is a flagrant violation of HOA Bylaw 7.4, undue vehicular congestion, and 11.2, creation of a public nuisance. I am documenting every single infraction. You will be hearing from our lawyers." And that's when I snapped. The exhaustion, the adrenaline, the parental fear, and the sheer, unadulterated rage at this woman's petty tyranny all coalesced into a single, crystalline moment of clarity. The time for subtlety was over. I put Max down gently, telling him to go stand with Dave, who was now trying to merge himself into a hedge. I took a deep breath and turned to face my troika of accusers. The stressed-out dispatcher, the HOA dictator, and the weary cop, who had just gotten out of his car to see what the new commotion was about. "You," I said, my voice dangerously calm as I pointed at Karen. "You want to talk about violations? Let's talk about them." I strode over to her, pulling my tablet from the back pocket of my jeans where I'd stashed it. I swiped it on, bringing up a diagnostic screen I'd prepared. "You want to know what happened today, Brenda?" I said, turning to the dispatcher. "This wasn't a system glitch. This was sabotage." I turned back to Karen, whose smug expression was beginning to falter. "It started this morning when every school bus GPS in the district simultaneously went dark. A funny coincidence, right? Except it wasn't. It was a localized, wide-spectrum GPS jamming signal, powerful enough to block the L1 and L2 frequencies the school's cheapo transponders use." Brenda's eyes widened. Officer Miller took a step closer, his professional curiosity piqued. "A jamming signal?" Brenda asked. "But who would—" "Who indeed?" I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Who has been on a week-long crusade against the bus schedule? Who has an almost psychopathic obsession with punctuality? And who? This was the coup de grace. Just so happened to install a new, ridiculously oversized, high-gain directional satellite dish on her roof this week. I jabbed my finger towards Karen's house. All eyes followed. The satellite dish stood there, a silent metal monument to her madness. "That's not a satellite dish," I said, my voice rising. "That's a signal jammer. A cheap one, probably bought off some sketchy website, but effective enough. She knocked out the bus's navigation to teach them a lesson, stranding hundreds of kids all over the city, including my son." I turned my tablet to Brenda and Officer Miller. On the screen was a simple map of the neighborhood with a pulsating red circle over Karen's property. "And this is the residual electromagnetic radiation from the jammer's power source. It's still leaking. Your house is practically glowing with illegal RF energy, Karen." The technical jargon, mostly accurate but delivered with the unshakable confidence of a televangelist, had its intended effect. Brenda stared, mouth agape. The small crowd of neighbors who had crept out of their houses to watch the drama were murmuring. Karen's face went through a fascinating spectrum of colors, from enraged crimson to a pasty, terrified white. That's ridiculous. It's for international television." Officer Miller, his weary demeanor replaced by a sharp focus, walked slowly over to me and looked at the tablet. He then looked at the dish. He looked at Karen's pale, sweating face. He had been dealing with this woman's petty complaints for years. He had seen the traffic jam. He had heard my son talk about lost buses. The pieces were clicking into place. He finally turned to Karen, his voice devoid of any warmth. "Ma'am," he said, with the slow, deliberate tone of a man who is about to ruin someone's day. "I believe we need to have a conversation about the Communications Act of 1934. Specifically, Section 333, which makes the willful or malicious interference with radio communications a federal offense." He paused for effect. "I'm going to need to take a look at that television receiver of yours, and you're going to need to come with me to answer a few questions." Checkmate. Karen stood there, clipboard hanging limply at her side, her reign of suburban terror ending not with a bang, but with the quiet, devastating mention of federal law. The sight of Karen being formally escorted to Officer Miller's patrol car was, I have to admit, deeply, profoundly satisfying. It was like watching the Wicked Witch of the West melt, not with water, but with the dry, inescapable language of a federal statute. A stunned silence fell over the cul-de-sac, broken only by the distant hum of a sanitation truck finally finding its way back to civilization. The neighbors blinked at each other as if waking from a long, beige-colored nightmare. With the primary antagonist neutralized, I turned my attention to the secondary crisis. Brenda, the dispatcher, was still staring at me, her expression a cocktail of fury, awe, and grudging respect. "So, you hacked my entire system?" she said, not as an accusation, but as a statement of fact. "You hijacked the entire city fleet to find a school bus." "I prefer the term unauthorized diagnostic audit," I said with a shrug. "And it wasn't to find a school bus. It was to find my school bus. The citywide chaos was more of an unexpected side effect of a user interface issue." She shook her head, a slow smile spreading across her face. "A user interface issue." "Right. You know, our system was designed when car phones were still a status symbol. We have protocols that are literally older than some of our drivers. The fact that you could just walk in and take the keys is terrifying, and also kind of impressive." We spent the next hour on my front porch, me at my laptop, Brenda on the phone, a strange ad hoc team working to restore complete order. I helped her identify the security holes I'd exploited, pointing out the digital equivalents of leaving the back door unlocked and the key under the mat. Dave, my contractor, having decided that he was now pot-committed to this insanity, served as our official coffee bringer and moral support. "You know," Brenda said, as the last of the misplaced vehicles was confirmed to be back on its route, "we're hiring. We have an opening for an IT security consultant. God knows we could use someone who knows what a firewall is for." I smiled. The thought was tempting for a split second. A return to the game. But then I looked at my house, at my son playing with his dinosaurs on the lawn, at the half-finished frame of the deck that Dave was now eyeing with renewed purpose. "Thanks, Brenda, but I'm retired," I said. "I've had enough high-stakes drama for one day, and my consulting fees are astronomical." She laughed. "I bet they are. Well, bus God, if you change your mind, you know how to reach us, apparently." The days that followed were strange. Harmony Meadows without Karen at the helm was like a ship without a rudder, albeit a very annoying, constantly critical rudder. The HOA was thrown into disarray. A special emergency election for a new president was called. To my abject horror, my neighbor Tom Henderson, the one whose car had been cited for the egregious 3-inch parking violation, started a grassroots campaign to get me elected. "You stood up to her, Leo," he'd said, cornering me by my mailbox. "You're a man of action. You understand technology. You could streamline the fine-issuing process." "Tom," I said, holding my hands up in surrender, "I would sooner perform my own root canal with a rusty spoon. I am not, nor will I ever be, HOA material. My only platform would be to immediately disband the HOA and declare a state of glorious anarchy." He backed away slowly, as if I'd just proposed replacing the community pool with a piranha tank. The nomination was quietly withdrawn. The story ends, as it should, a week later, on a perfectly normal Tuesday morning. I was on my front porch, a warm mug of coffee in my hands. The air was calm. Dave was happily, peacefully, hammering away at my new deck, the pleasant, rhythmic sound a far cry from the sirens and engine groans of the previous week. At 7:45 a.m., precisely, the big yellow bus rumbled to a stop. A new driver, a cheerful woman who had clearly been briefed on the legend of the cul-de-sac, gave me a broad smile and a thumbs up. Max, Velociraptor in his backpack, bounded up the steps. I took a sip of my coffee, savoring the tranquility. It was the quiet life I'd chosen. Messy, sometimes infuriating, but mine. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. A text from an unknown number. "System's still got some holes. Found another one this morning. Could use a second set of eyes on it. If you're not too busy being retired." B. A slow smile spread across my face. Maybe retirement wasn't about being quiet. Maybe it was about choosing your own battles. I looked at Max's bus, pulling away safely, on time, and knew without a doubt that it had all been worth it. I typed back a simple reply, the perfect end to my brief, chaotic reign, and the perfect beginning to a new chapter. "I'll send you my rates."